assert my firm belief
What if
that the only thing we have to fear is
we looked at things
fear itself.
differently?
I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Differently. Differently? Differently. Hello. You are listening to That's Life, stories and lessons that might make you think differently. I'm Heather, and today's topic has a familiar title, Battle of the Sexes. But it's also followed by the question, why the fight? So that makes it a little bit different here. Remember when I said we would cover sensitive topics that might make you feel uncomfortable? Well, total disclaimer, this is one of those topics. When we get into genders and this idea of man versus woman, it always seems to be a pretty sensitive topic, right? There's quite a bit of history there, still things going on today. So certainly if this comes up at the dinner table and dinner conversation, there's always a little bit of wiggling around in the seat and a lot of clearing the throats. It just always seems to be very uncomfortable. So I'm just gonna say that everything that I'm going to share is, from my perspective, which it's always so funny. I just a quick story here. A long time ago, I was working with somebody, and he would always, when we were in conversation or in conference calls or whatnot, he would say, well, from my perspective, and so finally one day I took him to the side and I said, you say from my perspective, but really what we can do is assume that 95% of what comes out of our mouths, out of anyone's mouths, is from your perspective, right? Because pretty much everything is your opinion. So anyway, just kind of funny there. But so all of this is from my perspective. It's tale as old as time. And we've seen it from the beginning, and there's the line that God made man first, right? God made Adam first. And then as we've progressed through the timeline, we see things like, women's suffrage in the early 1900s, women just fighting for their right to participate in the democratic process. And then in the 40s and during the war, and men went off to serve the country. Well, they needed women. They needed women to keep things going and work in the factories. And so we did. And then we start, we look at things like women in sports. We had the famous Battle of the Sexes between Bobby Riggs and Billie Jean King, where women are participating in what was once considered only a man's game. Or even now in high schools around the country and around the world, probably. We're hearing of girls who are fighting to be a part of football teams, boxing teams. So we still see it going on today. Equal pay. This continues to be a hot button issue where women are advocating to receive equal compensation as their male counterparts for doing the same job. There are cultures where women are still oppressed. So we look at what we have going on here in America, but in other countries around the world, women still cannot own homes. They still are not allowed to work. It's not a choice for them. They are not allowed to work. Their job is they are used to create children. They are used to have children. And, then more recent events here in America, we saw or heard the stories where men use their position of power over women in the workplace. Then we start looking at, there are examples from the other side too. So we switch over to the other column where, thousands, hundreds of thousands of women have been gathering in marches around the country, wearing vagina hats, right? I've seen all women companies where that is, a badge of honor, that it's women-led, or women-owned, women-led, only women work there. And then even when we look at pop culture, I think about Beyonce's hit song, like, Who Run the World? Girls, right? So it seems like there's always been this competition between the two sides where it's been one side trying to show or prove superiority over the other. And that word superiority is important here because by definition, being a feminist, which by the way, I consider myself a feminist is really someone who is advocating for political, economic, and social equality. So equality, not superiority. And I'm certain that there are people out there who believe that their race, religion, gender are superior to others. But I would venture to say that many, I don't want to necessarily say the majority because I'm not certain, but I would say that many people out there believe in equality. So that is what really led to my question, why the fight? And I'm not necessarily getting into the topic of the, recent events here in America with the Me Too movement or, equal pay. My quick view on this is that anyone should be able to do the job they have the talent, skills, and experience to do without having to jump over extra hurdles or power plays. And they should be compensated based on performance, not how they identify. So that's just plain and simple my opinion on that. If you want to hear more about the Me Too movement or gender pay, we can equal pay for genders, we can also dive into that at a different podcast. But what I want to share today is really how this battle between sexes has played out in my life and left me now with a different outlook and a different approach. One where it's not fighting back, but learning to play with. So I never saw, or I never felt gender bias formally play out in the workplace either way, to my advantage or to my disadvantage. And what I mean by that is, being to my advantage, I never felt like because I was a woman, I was offered more liberties, more grace. No. If I did something wrong, I was told this was wrong. If I did something right or, something great, I was praised for that. So it was all very performance-based. I've never felt like to my disadvantage that because I was a woman, I was overlooked for an opportunity or compensated any differently. So I never saw any gender bias formally play out in the workplace. Where I did see it is informally in my relationships. So in my past roles, just nature being in marketing and around sales, it tends to be, and especially at, technology, in the technology industry, it does tend to be male dominated. And so most of my professional career, I've been working very closely with male colleagues and always had really great, really solid working relationships with these male colleagues. And never felt out of place. Just, really when I think back on it, it was that we had that level of comfort with one another, and we trusted one another because we knew, we got to know each other on that informal level, and then that translated over into the work environment. But as the years went on, and probably in the last 5 years or 5 to 10 years or so, I started losing some of that connection. And because I'm a pretty inquisitive person, I kind of started asking some of those male colleagues, and because it was a very noticeable change. And what I started hearing from them was that they were fearful. They didn't know anymore what was okay to say, what was okay to do. Was it okay to joke around? Was it not? And so this idea of male-female connection in the workplace really started playing into their fears. Is it all right to compliment her? Is this offensive? So instead of feeling equal, which I had previously, I now felt alienated. These relationships that had been strong began to weaken because there were just too many questions floating around. There were too many what ifs. What if I do this and she's not okay with that? Or what is okay to say? What is okay to do? And all of these questions were encircling fear of crossing some line with me. When really, the only question that was needed was, where's your line? Where are your boundaries? How do we make sure that that relationships are kept individual, and that none of them are, just kind of blanket relationships, like treating women one way or the other in the workplace, right? And I think that really what that comes down to is defining the rules for ourselves and defining our own boundaries. And that's really what I want to say here, is that for women, defining those boundaries for yourself. What are you personally comfortable with? Because what I'm personally comfortable with isn't going to be the same as what my other female colleagues are personally comfortable with. So that's one thing I want us to consider. And the next thing is really for the men to consider, how do you continue to engage with your female colleagues? How do you not over pivot and decide to completely disengage with them out of fear? So I want to take you back to this idea of not fighting back, rather playing with. And it's really interesting to me because we learn this concept at a young age, and then as we get older, we pass it on to the kids that we're around or the kids that we have that are our own. And so think about it. Close your eyes for a second. Imagine being at a playground and you're playing, you're doing your thing, and all of a sudden someone comes up to you, another kid, and they hit you. So what have we been taught to do? And when I was thinking about this, it was, we have been taught, and we teach our kids, don't hit back. Instead, tell that person, I didn't like that, and I don't want you to do it again. And then the hope is from everyone that in doing so, then the person on the other side, or the other kid, will say, I'm sorry, and you'll hug it out, and then you'll go on being friends, and you'll continue to play together, right? And I know that that's a very basic example, but really, when we think about it, like, why does that posture change the older we get? Why do we take this combative, competitive behavior into our adult world, into the workplace? So, in other words, if someone in the workplace comes to me and does something I don't like, why would my instinct be different than that of what we teach our kids, where it's don't fight back, don't throw a fist, don't go behind the scenes and start planning your revenge. Instead, tell that person, I didn't like that, I don't appreciate that, and let's move on and continue playing together. So my challenge for you, right, because we listen to all of this and then you're thinking, okay, so what do I do now? Is if there is a person at work, or it doesn't even have to be at work, it can be in your social environment, extracurricular activities, whatever. If there is a person that is hard for you to read and is making you feel a bit uncomfortable because you either don't know what your boundaries are with them, or they've maybe crossed a boundary with you, don't make assumptions. Make an effort. I'm going to say that again. Don't make assumptions about this person. Make an effort with this person. Get to know them. Have a conversation. Understand where their lines are. Instead of creating more space between the two of you and going the other direction and in order to create less tension, start to close that gap with communication. And then instead of battle lines, we have boundary lines. They're still lines, but at least we can still play together with boundary lines. So I really want to hear your thoughts on this, or if you have any personal stories you want to share, that would be great as well. But ask yourself, what are you going to do differently? Because that's life.